In this last video, I'm going to talk about diseases related to the respiratory tract. And the first thing I want to mention is talk a little bit about infections. So it says compare infections of the upper and lower respiratory tract. Now, I just want to clarify that when I'm talking about an infection, that means a disease caused typically by a bacteria, virus, by a microorganism. So somebody has an infection. They have a viral infection, they have a bacterial infection, and there are many, many different kinds of infections that can cause respiratory problems. And I'm just doing a real quick introduction to that. And so one of the main things and one of the main reasons why I even like to distinguish between the upper and lower respiratory tract is for this reason. That upper respiratory tract infections tend to be less serious than lower respiratory tract infections. And so when you think about it, the upper respiratory tract, what do we have? Our nasal cavity, our sinuses, our pharynx, and depending on who you are, the larynx. And as compared to the lower, where we get the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and the lungs, which include the alveoli. So if we look at these upper respiratory tract infections, we're talking about things like colds, like sinusitis. Those are probably the two main things that we get. And, when you have a cold or you have a sinusitis or you have sinus infection, they can be really miserable, but they are almost never life-threatening. Something really odd would have to happen, some complication, but it's very, not likely. The passageways, even when your nose gets completely stuffed up, you can still breathe in air through your mouth and get plenty of air to your lungs. You're not going to interfere with your ability to get oxygen to your blood. So upper respiratory tract infections, a lot of them are viral. A lot of them are really uncomfortable, but they tend not to be particularly serious or life-threatening. On the other hand, when we get to lower respiratory tract infections, in fact, if we start just looking at I'll go back to the parts of the respiratory tract. We have this whole, the mouth area, then we get the smaller area of the trachea, and then more narrow of the bronchi, and even more narrow than the bronchioles. So now you start talking about very small areas that if you blocked them, you could block whole parts of the lungs. So we're getting into finer and finer passageways, and lower respiratory tract infections can end up really blocking a substantial portion of the respiratory tract, blocking our ability to do gas exchange. And that can have a big impact on health. So pneumonia, again, there's many different kinds of bacteria and viruses that cause pneumonia, but when someone has pneumonia, typically what they have is an infection of the lungs. Pneumonia is an infection of the lungs. When SARS-CoV-2 started around, people were very concerned about infections that people would get in their lungs. And that's because SARS-CoV-2 is not like a cold virus. It doesn't infect the upper respiratory, it infects primarily the lower respiratory tract. So now you're getting lung involvement and you're getting possible blockage in lungs. So here's a picture, I think this is just supposed to be like a normal clean x-ray of the lungs. You can see the heart there. And here's an infection this is an x-ray of somebody that has pneumonia. And you can actually see the mucus in there blocking portions of the lungs. So this person could have potentially a life-threatening infection that prevents them from ventilating properly. Another lower respiratory tract infection that a lot of us have gotten or will get is acute bronchitis. So I'm going to give you the term acute bronchitis and chronic bronchitis. When we're talking about acute bronchitis, we're talking about an infection that you get sick, you might feel completely miserable, but usually in a relatively short period of time, you're going to get better. So acute means you're going to get sick, but over a short period of time, your immune system is going to fight it and you're going to get better. So we do get, a lot of people will get acute bronchitis where you have infections of the bronchi. And again, you get infections, you get inflammation, you get fluid accumulation, and you can imagine that that could interfere with breathing. And so that can be a potentially um, dangerous condition as compared to a cold or sinusitis. Okay, so pneumonia and acute bronchitis, these lower respiratory tract infections, tend to be somewhat more serious than the upper respiratory tract infections. I wanted to, in particular to talk about just smoking related infections, or not infections. I'm not talking about infections anymore. These are actually diseases that are not caused by infections. These are diseases that are typically caused by smoking, or some people have been exposed to a lot of wood burning, like their house wasn't ventilated right, or they've been firefighters, and so you've breathed a lot of smoke. Some people have these kind of conditions from living in very polluted cities. I know there's cities all over the world that have warnings that you shouldn't go outside today because the air quality is so bad. So I'd like to summarize some of these diseases, and I put them all under smoking related just for ease, but it really could be anything related to chronic exposure to poor quality air. So summarize how smoking is related to cancer, chronic bronchitis, and emphysema. So all of us are aware of the idea, the concept that cigarette smoking leads to lung cancer. We've been coached in that our whole lives, and it's still true. Um, and so it is weird that we have this urge to smoke, that we want to do something that's so acutely bad for our lungs and long term bad, chronically bad for our lungs. But we find pleasure in that. So, um, but anyway, smoking is is well known to cause lung cancer. And lung cancer is a really challenging cancer. It's one of the harder cancers to get rid of. It's one of the more deadly cancers, and it's one of those that metastasizes a lot, meaning spreads throughout the body. And this is just a picture, again, an X-ray of somebody with a lung cancer in their lungs. So people can get lung cancer, and they do all the time without smoking, but you can have exposure to other chemicals. There's a lot of unknown reasons, but by far the greatest number of lung cancer cases is due to smoking. If you quit smoking, the longer you are away from smoking, your lung cancer risk actually goes down. So quitting smoking at any time in your life can have benefits. So lung cancer is one of the biggies for that's caused by smoking. There's two other diseases that are under the category of COPD. A lot of you have heard of COPD. It stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Chronic meaning long term, it's not going away. Obstructive, it's blocking. Pulmonary means your lungs. Disease means not good. COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, means your lungs are permanently blocked. And there's two diseases that fall under this. So COPD is kind of a general term, and people with CD can have one or the other or both of these. And here's that other one, chronic bronchitis. I already mentioned acute bronchitis, which is caused by an infection. But chronic bronchitis is typically caused from smoking or some of the other things I mentioned. This is something once you get chronic bronchitis, you'll be waking up in the morning coughing. Oh, you hear the smoker's cough? That's not chronic bronchitis, but you'll do that every single day. Usually smoker's cough is just trying to loosen up phlegm and undo damage to cilia that you did the day before. But chronic bronchitis is chronic inflammation of the bronchi and difficulty breathing, and a lot of coughing and a lot of discomfort. It doesn't get better. Once you get chronic bronchitis, it is not going away. You can treat the symptoms, but it's not going away. Emphysema is the other of the two major diseases that are listed under COPD. Emphysema is a disease of the alveoli, and I'm going to show you that in this picture. What happens when someone has emphysema? So here's your bronchioles ending in the alveoli, those little air sacs. And remember, the air sacs are surrounded by blood vessels, so you're exchanging oxygen. And every one of these blood vessels is surrounded by capillaries. I mean, every one of these alveoli is surrounded by capillaries, blood vessels. Okay, so you've got a lot of surface area where you're getting a lot of oxygen into your blood. If I take this whole thing and I pop it, which happens when you get emphysema, the alveoli pop. Instead of having the surface area of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little parts of the alveoli, you just have the surface area of 1. And you've just reduced the amount of oxygen going into your blood by, I don't know, 7 times or 10 times or whatever. So you're not oxygenating your blood well enough. So when someone gets emphysema, usually from smoking, what happens is their alveoli burst. They reduce the surface area of their alveoli, and they're going to get less oxygen into their blood. The other thing that happens is, remember that old thing with your intercostal muscles contracting and your diaphragm contracting? Air's moving in, everything relaxes, and the air gets pushed back out. Well, you don't need to move these alveoli very much to get air in and out because these little air sacs are really small. But if you take them and you make them into one air sac, you got to squeeze them a little bit more to get all that air out. So, and when you multiply this by 1,000,000 of these in your lungs, somebody with emphysema ends up with air trapped in their lungs that they can't exhale. Somebody with emphysema increases their residual volume. Remember, we said residual volume is the amount of air that's left in your lungs that you can't move in or out. It just holds the spaces open. Somebody with emphysema has an increased residual volume. They have more air in their lungs, and a couple things happen. Somebody with a severe case of emphysema, their chest actually gets bigger. They have what they call a barrel chest. They get air trapped in their chest, and you can actually notice it when you look at somebody. The other thing that happens is it's hard to exhale. So you can breathe in normally, inhale perfectly fine, but when you go to exhale, it takes more effort. You've got to really squeeze your intercostal muscles and your diaphragm. And a lot of times people with emphysema have a characteristic sound when they exhale. They're going to sound very they're going to be pushing that air out with a lot of effort. And you can hear it. Somebody who's familiar with emphysema, and even if you're not, you might notice, I've had students say, oh, I've heard my grandfather breathe like that. That I didn't know that was from emphysema. So it's very, it's debilitating. You're not getting enough oxygen. It makes life difficult. So summarize the smoking-related diseases: lung cancer, and then COPD is a general name for chronic bronchitis and emphysema. One last thing, when you look at these, I can put these in a multiple choice question. I'll say, which of these is curable? And people always think, oh, lung cancer, that's the worst thing ever. But guess what? Out of these 3, it's the only one that has the potential, could potentially be cured. And we know the cure rate for lung cancer is relatively low compared to cancers in general. So if you think you'd rather get lung cancer than chronic bronchitis or emphysema, I don't know. They're all bad. So you know what you do? You take care of your lungs. Whatever it takes. You exercise, you breathe good, healthy air every opportunity you get. It's the only set of lungs most of us are ever going to get. You guys, good luck. That's the end of respiratory system. Oh, maybe I have. There we go. Check your progress. Name and describe the symptoms of some common respiratory infections and disorders. Make sure you can distinguish between if it's an infection, meaning it's caused by a bacterium or virus, versus it's caused by something else. And list 3 respiratory disorders commonly associated with smoking tobacco. There you go. Take care.